and continue.
Okay, when I finished my course at Michigan and graduated, they sent me to a temporary military academy at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. There I received my midshipman training, and at the end of my midshipman training, I was assigned to a temporary assignment to the Navy Yard at Philadelphia because they were planning to have me go as a damage control officer on the Massachusetts. I got married in the meantime, between the time I graduated and before I reported to the Navy Yard there in Philadelphia. When I finished my damage control training at Philadelphia, I took the train, my wife and I took the train back to Chicago and from there to San Francisco. Now it happened that the United Nations was just being formed at San Francisco at that time. And so we had some difficulty getting a room. Mm-hmm. We had to take a room over in Oakland on the other side of the bay. And each day I would report to the Navy Yard to see if there was transportation for me to go and find my ship. One day they said, yes, the transportation was there, and I should report in the next morning to go to Hawaii. And from there, I would be deployed to find my ship. I took a troop transport out of Oakland, and we sailed through submarine-infested waters to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And in Hawaii, they arranged for me to fly down to Ulithi Atoll, which is just north of the equator. And that's where the fleet was based at that time. So I flew down to Ulithi, but the fleet had left, and I was to join them in the Philippines. So I took a ship to the Philippine Islands, and when I got there, I stayed for a few days in bachelor officer quarters on Leyte because the ships, the whole fleet was out, and I waited until they came in, and then I took an LCVP and rowed out to the ship. And I arrived the day that the admiral transferred his flag from the Massachusetts to another ship. Mm-hmm. And so my first meal in the officer's wardroom there was a very fancy one because they were throwing a party for the admiral.
You had a rough trip in too.
What was that?
So you had a rough trip in that first day too.
I had a rough trip out to the ship, and so I felt I was really welcomed.
Yeah.
We stayed at anchor there for a while, and while we were at anchor, I was assigned as the boat officer for an evening run, because what would happen is that during the day, fellows from different ships would go to visit their shipmates, people that they knew on other ships. And so at the end of the day, there was about maybe a dozen sailors there that belonged on other ships.
Mm-hmm.
And I was assigned as the captain of that small boat to see that those sailors got to where they belong. The difficulty is that in a deep situation like that, where the water is very deep, the chain between the anchor and the ship is very long, and the wind and tide moves the ship around. So on the map, you're shown where the anchor is, not where the ship is actually at. And so I took these seamen and we hunted and hunted, and finally I had all of them except two or three on their ships, and we couldn't find where they were supposed to go. So I found a hospitality ship. It was an old ocean liner cruise ship that had been fixed up and with lots and lots of berths, and so it was kind of a hospitality ship, and I put those fellows off on that ship, and then I went back to find Massachusetts, which I did, and those fellows then in the morning would be picked up by boats from their own ships.
Mm-hmm.
After that experience, Massachusetts was assigned to go north of Tokyo to a small town called Kamaishi, a couple of 100 miles north of Tokyo. There was a steel mill there, and we were ordered to try to destroy that steel mill. So we sailed in close, and with our big guns, we fired on the steel mill. We saw it burning and turned around to leave. Later on, we were assigned to go back there and finish the job. And on this particular occasion, when we were there at Kamaishi, we didn't realize it, but it was August 9th, and while we were in the process of destroying that steel mill, the Air Corps was dropping the second atomic bomb at Nagasaki. And that happened at the same time, those two items. We went back and rendezvoused with the whole fleet, and then we were ordered to mount a major attack on Tokyo itself. We sailed in toward Tokyo, and early in the morning on August 15th, we sent the aircraft off to bomb Tokyo. But the Japanese decided that they would surrender at that time, and so we called our aircraft back. The plan was for them to firebomb the city, and our heavy weapons would follow into the harbor there and use our 16-inch guns to destroy whatever the air attack had left intact in Tokyo. I'm convinced that Tokyo would have burned to the ground within 24 hours if the Japanese had not surrendered when they did. We then stayed nearby, and many of the ships were sent into Tokyo Harbor, and where the final surrender would be signed. Our ship, the Massachusetts, was assigned to stay near the entrance to the harbor and search for any submarine that might have the idea that he could go into the harbor and catch a lot of American ships. Thankfully, no submarine tried it. And so when the papers were all signed and everything was cleared up, we were sent back to the shipyard in Puget Sound at the Puget Sound, the shipyard there. I forget the name of the shipyard at this moment.
Yeah, I'm having trouble.
But anyhow, we sailed from Japan over to Puget Sound, and on the way, when we were somewhere near Alaska, we were sailing in a line, but there were 3 destroyers as pickets ahead of us, and I happened to be up on the mast checking on a big searchlight up there, and I saw the destroyer straight ahead of us dip slightly and dive right into a huge wave, and I was amazed. So I watched, and pretty soon there were some additional destroyers on each flank, and the same thing happened. They disappeared into this wave and popped up on the other side. And so I thought, we're the next. And sure enough, that we hit that wave and it broke over our bow. That's the only time I ever saw green water come over the bow of the ship. And we were high enough, of course, that it didn't really affect us, but there was green water down the whole length of the deck. We arrived back in Seattle, and one of the ships that was with us, a destroyer, had been damaged, and it had no reversing. The reversing gear on the propellers could not operate. So when we went into Puget Sound, a couple of tugs came out and lassoed that destroyer, and then used their own engines to slow it down. Then they pushed it into a dock over there at the Navy Yard at Seattle. We were stationed in Seattle for a while, and then deployed down to Long Beach, California, and it was from Long Beach that I exited the Navy and returned back to Chicago.
And say, I know one of the stories you told us is during your time in the Navy, your wife was writing you letters.
Oh yes.
And
my wife was writing letters, and there were a bunch of those letters were floating around, looking for me when we came back. And so when I got my leave and came home and returned to Seattle with my wife, there was this huge stack of letters that she had written and that I had not received. We saved those letters, still have them. And shortly after that, they had a kind of a homecoming party at our church. And I brought those letters there, and I read some of them to the folks in the party.
Hmm. Wow. I said, you say you were in charge of damage control on the Massachusetts. You want to talk a little bit
Well,
more about what that
yes,
job entailed and some of the things you
okay.
were expected of?
Yeah, I was an officer in the damage control department, and our responsibility was the to take care of the integrity of the ship and any incidental things. Like if a lock broke, why we had to have a carpenter ready to go and fix it. And if there was um, some something that had to be done, we had to have welders that
Hmm.
could make repairs to the ship. And so, uh, whenever we were in a battle situation, people from the damage control department would be deployed to different parts of the ship. With there'd be usually 3 or 4 in a group,
Hmm.
and of course they were not only to fix damage, they were the fire department for the ship. And so if we were hit, there would be a fire, of course, and our people were supposed to be there to put out the fire. Actually, the only fire that happened while I was aboard was when somebody threw a cigarette butt into a wastebasket.
That's good, yeah. Well, not so good for that wastebasket anyway. But yeah. I say, of course, the day that the Japanese surrendered was not just a special day, but it was your birthday as well, right?
That's right. It was my birthday, and
So,
so when I celebrate my birthday, I always remember that this was a special day over in Japan.
oh yeah, and said you remember, say, talking about when they launched the bombers, and then they were told to turn back. They were not allowed to land with bombs.
That's right. Um, the the bombers from the aircraft carriers were not allowed to land back on the carriers if they had live bombs aboard.
Mhm.
And so when the Japanese surrendered, we already had a huge number of airplanes from the carriers on their way with live bombs, and they had to get rid of them before they could land on the carriers. I was standing on the deck watching as one of these bombers came in between us and the carrier and dropped his bomb. Now, normally, when the bomb drops like that, it hits a wave and it hits the water and sinks. This one kind of hit the top of a wave and it skidded down across the trough and up the face of the next wave, up into the air and exploded. I wouldn't believe that could happen unless I had actually seen it.
Yeah, so that was say pretty close onto your own ship, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so close it damaged anything.
Yeah, pretty loud though, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh goodness. But like I say, trying to think of any other stories. I know you've told quite a few. Uh, do you know of any stories that come to mind around your time training to become an ensign, or anything around that time?
Um, no, uh, as I say, I graduated at the University of Michigan and then went to midshipman school at Cornell University. And it was a winter, a special winter because the snow was really deep. Um, I remember going, well, one thing that happened, the snow began to melt. And one day I was marching on campus with a group of the other uh, midshipmen,
Hmm.
and there was a couple of fellas in our particular group that got the idea it would be fun to lag behind and then slide on the walk. And they slid into the back of our marching platoon, and the guys were tumbling all over one way or another.
Hmm.
One of the officers saw it, and we had to do extra duty that night.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again for talking to us. Is there anything that stories that are coming to mind, or anything at the last you'd like to say?
I can't think of anything offhand.
All right. Well, like I say, thank you again very much for talking with us, and again, thank you for your service and for all the work you've done here with the LST Memorial.
You're sure welcome.